Ailbhe, we speak to you, your disembodied form. You join us from Westminster, and for those of you watching the video and not just listening, it does look a little bit morbid. Could you tell our viewers where you are?
Yeah, broadcasting live from the coffin. I can only apologise. For people watching on YouTube, they can see that I am in a sort of dark panelled small container, and there's not much light. It is one of the old phone booths, but right by the House of Commons press gallery, where back in the day journalists used to phone their news desks and yell the story down the phone. And they're basically the only quiet place you can find in Parliament to do a podcast recording. But yeah, I do look a little bit like I'm 200 years old and speaking to you from beyond the dead.
Well, you can yell at us about this story now. Ailbhe, I feel like we should also be honest with listeners. We did record a podcast on this subject yesterday, and then were sort of hamstrung by the government actually announcing that they were going to legislate this week in relation to the production of non-consensual intimate images. Can you give us a sense of how the government arrived at that decision, what it is they're announcing? Tell us about how Number 10's thinking about this.
Yeah, so technically they aren't legislating anything new, or there's no new law. But yes, you're right that when we were recording yesterday, certain things hadn't developed. And what happened since is the big thing that's moved on this story around Grok and the intimate images that can be produced on X, which is owned by Elon Musk. The big thing that's changed is that Liz Kendall came out and said that she's going to bring a particular bit of the Data Act into force. So the way it used to be was that sharing intimate images on a social media platform is a breach of the Online Safety Act. So that's already illegal. That came into force in the summer. But what's new is that creating intimate images, basically making deep fakes using AI, was made illegal by the Data Act, but the government strangely hadn't brought it into force. And campaigners had been calling for this for months and months. And it was only yesterday Liz Kendall, the technology secretary, came to the House of Commons and said, we're going to bring this into force. So that means that Ofcom, who are going to be the first people making a ruling on what to do around this, they have more powers at their disposal, because essentially what X is doing is unlawful in several different ways now. And we've had quite a clear signal from the government now that they want to take serious action on this. Ofcom is looking at it, but it could be a massive fine, or X will be forced to take some action before it gets to that point.
This is the point, isn't it, Tom? Is that, no matter your opinion about the sort of the change in tenor of discourse on X, or the sort of the strain of politics that's now taking root there, ideally, I think most people would say, no, regardless of how unpleasant it is, we still believe in free speech. We still believe in the right of people to debate, to discuss, for journalists to break stories, etc. But if you have a company as powerful as X being as reluctant, obstructive, or just disregarding essentially the law of the land when it comes to this and other issues, the British government could essentially end up in a place where it has no other option but to seek a court order blocking access to the website. It's a really tricky, well, I guess you could say, free speech dilemma for those in power.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing to say, I think, for listeners is that the government didn't seek this fight. They weren't looking to start the new year with a battle with Elon Musk. That is not what they intended. They had a whole plan for the start of the year. Ailbhe will know it by the back of her hand now, but it's a plan to get back on the front foot, and this was not in that plan, and it kind of snuck up on them because of the scale of these abusive images that they started to understand. I think literally only a matter of weeks ago, and it kind of exploded onto their radar. And the analysis that they've come up with, those close to Starmer, is that you cannot let this pass. You cannot look not just weak but impotent in the face of this. And they are actively saying to their MPs, we cannot just look like we're protesting against this kind of thing. We cannot just sort of put our hands up in the air and say, okay, we're going to come off X in some kind of gesture against this. They are the government of the United Kingdom. It is in their powers to try and stop this. Now, that is more than just a statement about the government's relationship with big tech, with Elon Musk, with Twitter, with free speech. It's a statement of kind of philosophical intent about what they believe as a government and why they believe that voters are so disillusioned with politics. They feel that voters look at governments, successive governments, going back all the way to the financial crisis, and those governments look powerless. They look like they say things but don't actually achieve anything. So the analysis among those close to Starmer is that we have to mean something here. And they are very disappointed with Ofcom because they think Ofcom is a kind of a dog with all these really, really sharp teeth that looks very scary, but it's completely muzzled and it never does anything. And so the way that they need to behave and they need to show the voters is that they can pass laws. That is the point of a government, is to pass laws to change the law of the land to deal with this. So I think it's a really interesting moment. And the other thing I would say is they think that Musk has got himself into a position which is absolutely indefensible and against public opinion, not just in Britain and across Europe, but even in the United States, which is, a bit more libertarian, perhaps, than we are. This when it came to Musk's attention that this was happening on Grok, his response was to stop it happening, apart from for those people who are willing to pay. So if you pay, you can still apparently do this. Now, the government has concluded that is just an indefensible position that nobody in the UK essentially will defend. I think what is then difficult, and one will become a politically difficult subject that Ailbhe will be digging into in the days and weeks ahead, is where do you go from there? Because the government also knows that Elon Musk is incredibly powerful. They're not unaware of this. They're not blasé about this. They understand that Musk controls satellites that are used by almost every part of our economy at the moment. He's an incredibly powerful figure that they don't ideally want to fight, but they feel they have no choice.
Yeah, this is just on the public sentiment, some of the polling I've seen on this measure, it's sort of one of the most universal results I think I have ever seen when it comes to public opinion polling.
Yeah.
It's something like 96% of the British electorate are opposed to Grok producing these images. There's sort of
who are the 4%?
Well, yeah, entirely valid question, right? Probably people that didn't understand what the question was or know what Grok is, right? Ailbhe, I'm struck by this point about Ofcom because before we even get into the Online Safety Act, there are plenty of people that have been highly critical, sharply critical of Ofcom in recent years, particularly as relates to broadcasts happening on GB News, politicians anchoring news shows, many people saying this is a breach of the code, what are you going to do about it? And it reminded me a little bit, actually, of an interview I did a while ago with Mick Lynch, the former General Secretary of the RMT. We were talking during the cost of living crisis, and he was essentially very forcefully making the argument, what is the purpose of these regulators? I think it was in relation to Ofgem he was talking about, and he was talking about the radical increases in people's energy bills. If they aren't prepared to sort of turn the screw on these big companies, we can accept, okay, we live in a capitalist society with boundaries, with guardrails, with safeguards for the vulnerable, and essentially we say, you, Ofgem, you control the price, you control the maximum amount that people's energy bills can go up so that people don't get whacked when there's a war in Ukraine or whatever else. And I would be interested to hear from your reporting and your conversations in Westminster and with those in Downing Street, how they feel about Ofcom in relation to this. I appreciate that it might not be a sort of no one wants to govern by Quango, right? But at some point, if you empower an organisation, it should be acting on with the power that you've given it, right?
Yeah, well, it's exactly as Tom says, right? That there's a view in number 10 and at the top of the Labour Party that Ofcom has these levers in theory at its disposal, and it has even more now that the Online Safety Act has been passed, and even more since yesterday when Liz Kendall brought this new part of the law into force. It has all these levers at its disposal, And there are these moments, like you say, Ollie, around sort of the news output on GB News or whatever, where it looks like Ofcom might crack down hard and have a big moment. And it has never really bitten. And it has this reputation, rightly or wrongly, around Westminster for being a bit toothless. And I think the people in government are fed up with that. And, there's the wider geopolitics of this, which we'll come on to, and how this relates to Trump and so on. But I think just in its own terms, there is a desire to see Ofcom use the powers at its disposal. And so there's been a really clear signal from the Prime Minister and from the Technology Secretary, Liz Kendall, that they do expect Ofcom to come down hard on this. And there's an expectation on the government from government on Ofcom that they need to come down hard on this. But I think also still a little bit of a hope that having made these legal powers quite clear, that it might not come to that, but actually just X gets its act together and restricts this before they need to get there.
Yeah, I guess this is so contingent on the behaviour of Elon Musk, isn't it, Tom, who has not proven himself to necessarily be the most consistent or at times what appears to be rational actor, disregarding his enormous wealth and commercial success, particularly when it comes to matters relating to the British state. Look at this time last year, what he was tweeting about Keir Starmer, Jess Phillips, over the summer appearing via video link to a Tommy Robinson rally and talking about the need to dissolve Parliament and institute a change of government. The stakes here, and we'll talk about more of this in the second half, but the stakes for the government are so exceptionally high, and the person they are going up against, both in their proximity to the US administration, his own power, and then the consistency of his behaviour, there are a lot of unknowns here for the British government. Absolutely.
I mean, it's hard to think actually of a moment in recent history where the sort of the areas of economics, of foreign policy, and of day-to-day politics come so closely together. The challenge, the diplomatic challenge of handling Donald Trump is more than any government has faced in terms of managing a US president in any of our lifetimes. But the challenge of managing the world's richest man is not something that we spoke about really when it was Tony Blair or John Major or Margaret Thatcher. They weren't the principal concerns. But this is now a serious act of diplomacy, of foreign policy, of geopolitics. If you think that somebody very senior in the government described this to me recently, the scale of Elon Musk's power. He controls 50% of the satellites in space now. That's an extraordinary figure. Over a space of time recently, he put more satellites into space than the United States and Russia combined. Now, this is a kind of wealth and a power that is beyond what we've seen. We have in Sudan, we have militias using Elon Musk's Starlink technology to carry out their warfare. He has a stake or a power over the war in Ukraine. And that is before you get into the announcement this week that the US military will be tying up with Grok to form a military AI. Now, the consequences for that are kind of unfathomable as we sit here right now. Does that mean that there will be a kind of pulling away of US military technology away from the United States? Would we get access to that technology if Keir Starmer fell out with Elon Musk and banned X in Britain? Is that the kind of thing where we could that technology could be turned off? You think about the basis of the British military's strategy for decades, and it has been purchasing top-of-the-range American kit, where, say, the French have gone in a different direction and made and purchased their own kit. These are extraordinary decisions that are now coming across the Prime Minister's desk that tie together the future of Britain's defence with what you do about these disgusting images on Grok. And it's hard to sort of, I think what we need to think about in this, when we're covering it as journalists, this is a kind of indicator of the world to come. It's not an anomaly. It's the way things are moving. If we think about Larry Ellison, if we think about Jeff Bezos and Musk. This is now a part of European politics to manage the oligarchs in Silicon Valley.
Well, I was going to say, I haven't, politics has been so busy, I haven't managed to write or even pitch anything on this. But before I started as Paul Ed at the NS, one of the big things I was thinking was that being a Paul Ed for 2025 and not 2026 means covering tech companies like nation states, that actually I need to be sourced up at Google and Meta and X and understanding the politics inside those and how they interact with our government in the same way that you understand the way other nation states interact with them. This just sort of is the new landscape. And I think that this is the right way of thinking about them, in that they fall under the American remit in a sense, in that Trump, in some of his tariff negotiations, for example, does things basically in order to get a better deal for American tech companies. Some of the tariff threats are basically to leverage better access for these tech giants. It's to sort of slightly bounce other countries into hosting data centers for these companies or whatever. And then separately or interlinked with that, they're kind of autonomous in their own right, because, you know, there's the question of how much are Elon Musk and Donald Trump close? How much will Donald Trump be alienated by this and by any future moves that the UK government makes in relation to Grok? But there's also, just as Tom says, Elon Musk's heft in his own right. And Labour have been thinking about this for a really long time. I mean, I was talking about this with someone earlier. The first scoop I did at Bloomberg a few years ago was a story about how Elon Musk and X were refusing to take down a deepfake video about Keir Starmer that had gone viral. And it was referred to as British politics' first deepfake moment. And you could see even then, this is probably about 3 years ago, that Labour officials were sort of grappling with how you navigate such a powerful individual who has this intense dislike of Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. And they were, there was so much anxiety coming off them when I reported this story, because they were cross about it and they'd had these interactions with X behind the scenes. X was refusing to take it down. They said that they needed proof that Keir Starmer hadn't said these things, which was impossible to do. Like, how do you prove an absence? They were having this sort of back channel diplomacy, but Labour were really, really nervous about it coming out. They were sort of worried about poking the bear. Now they've decided that they have no choice. As Tom says, the thinking is just that this was too bad not to do anything, and the public is overwhelmingly behind them. But it does amount to quite a big geopolitical risk. This is very different to Keir Starmer's wider approach on the US, and everyone, even people are very supportive of this, but they also know that it's risky.
Tom, there's an escalation of a war of words here. The British government is legislating. We've sort of danced around this conversation a little bit, but Musk is close. He's back in the tent, really, in Washington. Our US correspondent, Freddie Hayward, has been tweeting about the jeopardy of this move for Britain. In fact, I believe he's written about it in the magazine this week as well, which I would direct people to go and read. But my sense here is that, first of all, there's a ginormous risk for Keir Starmer. A secondary and probably a harsher and more critical reading, that you could interpret this as quite a confused approach, because whether it's the abduction of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, whether it's the prosecution of Israel's war in Gaza, there have been plenty of moments where the British state could have sought to create a little bit of distance with America, but declined to do so. And now, and this is kind of when I talk about the jeopardy, we are sort of in open conflict now with one of the people who is most closely associated, one of the billionaires who is most closely politically associated with Donald Trump. The potential for fallout here is extraordinary.
It is. And I think your point about the kind of confusion of the strategy is key here. And we shouldn't be too harsh on the government about this. Like, this is a particularly difficult moment for them. But I think it highlights a problem that Britain has been having since the Brexit referendum, which is, there has been a major change in Britain's position in the world. has there been a major change in Britain's foreign policy as a result? If you think back to 2016 and those moments of Brexit and the first term of Donald Trump, what we've essentially done is to carry on with the same policy of trying to be as close as we can while outside the EU to the EU and to the United States. We haven't sought any kind of break with the United States. We haven't sought any kind of break with the European Union. We haven't sought any kind of change in our defensive posture to Europe or our attitude to Israel, as you say. But it's the question, I guess, which is perturbing people in Westminster and across Whitehall is, can that be sustained? Can that be sustained when you have somebody like Elon Musk with the power that he has, who is directly coming after the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom in the way that he has, with the vitriol that he has, and the open support, not for Nigel Farage, actually. Nigel Farage is seen as too soft, too liberal, too much of a sellout for Elon Musk. He is supportive of Tommy Robinson and Rupert Lowe. We're also in a position where the United States is openly saying that it is going to annex Greenland, territory of one of Britain's NATO partners, a member of the European Union, member of NATO. These are moments which completely shape the foreign policy of a government. And if you look kind of behind the scenes, what are we doing? We're apparently in discussions with Germany and France about sending warships to Greenland for exercises to deter our primary strategic ally in the world. That is an extraordinary moment. And we should just sort of take a beat in a way to think about how extraordinary that is, as is this moment with Grok. But I sort of see Britain, and this is not too much of a dig at this government, but just I think the entire Westminster establishment, in a sense, as we're almost in a bit of a crouch. We don't know what to do because the options are so bad. You think about the dependency that we have on the United States. It's not just a simple case of going, oh, well, we'll turn away from the United States and we'll turn away from American big tech. Our payment system relies on it. We're dependent on LNG gas. We're dependent on American technology, cloud-based technology, all the big tech. If you think about what your phone works on, if you think about what the government works on, what emails does the government use? All of this is based on American tech. So are we in a position to actively change strategy? And I think this is the conundrum that lies at the heart of that confusion that you see. The confusion is an expression of a kind of dependency which this government alone cannot do anything about.
Yeah. You could probably add the nuclear deterrent as well into that conversation as well. Ailbhe, can I sort of talk to you a little bit about the symbolic nature of X? Because to the MAGA movement in America, it is the public square. Right, it is where debates are had. It's where formerly Donald Trump, now Elon Musk, many other figures on that right. It is where they talk about politics. It is where debates are had, and there is a kind of, I think, grim irony to that political movement that if it was Britain that sort of banned access to it, and then I've seen various sort of I won't say right at the top end political figures, but certainly elected officials in America possibly threatening sanctions, things of that nature. I see the latest here is that the US Department of State's Sarah Rogers, who's the Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy, has said to GB News that nothing is off the table if the UK bans X. There is a despite X's relative, to other platforms, Instagram 2 to 3 billion monthly active users, X is about half a billion. So there are a few order of magnitudes there in terms of the user base. It has a bigger symbolism, doesn't it? It has a greater importance.
Exactly. And it's that symbolic status to Donald Trump that is why some people, especially on the United States side, see this as a strategic error from the UK. And this is part of what our colleague Freddie, who you mentioned, part of why he says that this seems like an incredibly risky move and has the potential to really destabilize relations between the US and the UK. I have to say, being on this side of the Atlantic, I would say people in government are a little bit more sanguine about that, in that they think that Donald Trump isn't going to blow up the UK-US relationship for Elon Musk, who he has had a tempestuous relationship with. They are not really talking about the symbolic value of X to MAGA people. They are, they're saying, of course, it's a risk alienating the richest man in the world, who happens to be a close friend of the most powerful man in the world. These are all things that a close ally of Keir Starmer's was saying to me earlier today. They were acknowledging that Trump can turn on and off the UK economy with a late night tweet. So, it is their words, not mine. But yet I think that there is a thinking that actually on balance, this is worth the risk. I have been struck, given how divided Labour is at the moment and how they are on a kind of low ebb. I've just been struck by how everyone seems to be quite supportive of this move. People want the government to be bolder. And actually, it's only when something is as unpopular as the notification of children on an app like X that the government is actually feeling able to be that bold. I mean, it is very difficult to Keir Starmer's wider approach to the US. He's still trying to maintain a good relationship with Donald Trump, maintain leverage. That is so important. He has held back on other issues, but I think that they feel like there is a gap between Donald Trump and Elon Musk. They are not one and the same. And overall, the political risk to them just doesn't seem as difficult as it looks from Freddie's vantage point in DC.